Let us pray. Sovereign Lord, we pray for the members of Parliament who are called to leadership among their fellow citizens. Give them vision to see far into the times of the issues of this nation. Courage to hold what they believe to be right, and integrity in their words and motives. And may their service to their people promote the welfare and peace of humankind through Jesus Christ our Lord. God and Father of humankind, who in your love made all the nations of the world to be of one family, help those of different races to love and understand one another better. Take away hatred, inequality, and prejudice, so all may work together for the coming of your kingdom of justice and peace through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Yeah. This house is in session. Minutes of the meeting held on Friday, 24th of April, 2020 to be confirmed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that those minutes be confirmed.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The aforementioned minutes are confirmed. Minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, 9th of June, 2020 to be deferred.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be deferred.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be deferred. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are deferred.
Announcements by Your Honor this week. Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General, petitions, papers.
Mr. Speaker, I am commanded to lay the annual report of the Barbados Investment and Development Corporation for the period April 1st, 2017 to March 31st, 2018.
Government notices, private members notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the Severance Payments Amendment Bill.
The question is that the aforementioned bill be read the first time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day. Suspension.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
Second.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended.
Government business.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 14, sir. In the name of the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment, and the Public Service, to move the second reading of the Barbados Optional Savings Scheme Bill 2020.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. I trust that my voice can be heard, Mr. Speaker. This is an unusual position. There are some times in the life of a nation, Mr. Speaker, when one is forced to reflect on where we are and what we confront and who shall carry the weight. And I have had cause to do a lot of reflection this year when I was on forced leave after my medical procedure. And in so doing, I realized that we live in unusual times, and what is required of our nation and the other nations of the world is to be able to harness the collective will of a population to stabilize it when required, but also to propel it when appropriate. We face an unusual set of circumstances as a small island developing state. The pandemic of COVID-19 has gripped the entire world. I dare say that I truly doubt that there is a country on this earth that it has not touched. But it has come on top of other conditions. We were fighting that of the climate crisis. Indeed, it is already the 15th of June, and unusually, the next storm to come will be the fourth for the season, in circumstances where the season got started before June 1st. And it is anticipated that it will be a season with a lot of heightened activity. We were fighting our own battles. Indeed, this government was elected, and this parliament, I can say fully, was elected on a platform of being able to stabilize the social and economic conditions of this country after what has come to be regarded by all as the lost decade, which left us with the regrettable reality of having the third highest debt to GDP ratios of the 200 nations of the world, roughly. But what has given me tremendous confidence and tremendous fortitude is the Barbadian people. I can think of no better place in the world to be today than this country. And I don't say so because I am the Prime Minister of Barbados. I'm honored and privileged to be. I say so because time after time after time, the people of this nation rise to the occasion to do what is necessary to stabilize and to keep Barbados safe. And I say so conscious that there are many of my colleagues regionally and globally that would love to be in my position today, to be able to report to a country that even when we have to take decisions that are difficult, even when we have to do things to bolster our condition, that the people of this nation instinctively, Mr. Speaker, instinctively rally and rise to the occasion and protect the condition of the nation and of the people of this nation. Mr. Speaker, this bill that is before this honorable chamber is a perfect example of the creativity of Barbadians, the commitment of Barbadians, the confidence of Barbadians, and above all else, the compassion of Barbadians for each other. And I say so, Mr. Speaker, with almost goose pimples on my skin, because we started the process knowing that the only way we will get through this difficult moment in time is if first and foremost we are our brothers and sisters keeper. That there has not just to be the use of the word solidarity, as WHO and others, the World Health Organization, have been using, but that in all that we do, we must reflect that solidarity as a nation. And therefore, the recognition that the government of Barbados, even as it sought to protect a large part of the public space by guaranteeing and stabilizing the employment for those who work for us, when all others in the private sphere and in the civil society sphere have had, understandably in some instances, to take decisions that they regretted taking because simply of the cessation of economic activity that had by nature to be associated with the requirements of the public health advisors in order to be able to stabilize the spread, contain it, and allow it to come right back down. And Mr. Speaker, we were able to do that. But even before that, let us go back, and I want for the record to commend the Minister of Health and the Emergency Organizing Committee who have been, Operations Committee, who have been meeting every day effectively since early January. We're now in the month of June. We're now in the month of June. And they've met effectively every day to direct the affairs of this nation under the leadership of the member for the city of Bridgetown, who has distinguished himself and who sometimes I feel for, because he does not know the difference between Sunday and Thursday now, Monday and Wednesday, Saturday and Tuesday. In fact, I would not be surprised if some Saturdays his car turns into here. Such is the nature of the task that has come to him. But Mr. Speaker, he is a soldier. And a soldier has issued the call, clarion call, that there shall be no surrender and no retreat. And Mr. Speaker, we have all yielded, and the country has adopted that attitude that his leadership has brought to the task that is before us. But we all knew, sir, that it would not be a case of only saving lives. Thank you, sir. But it was also a case of protecting livelihoods. And of necessity, as I said, we had to take decisions to restrict movement of people, which by extension meant restriction of economic activity. With respect to our borders, we had to take decisions. We did not shut our borders, but we understood the implications from all others around us that commercial air traffic would immediately also have to cease if we were to get a hand on it, especially since we would have imposed the quarantine requirements, and hence us and others collectively imposing it meant that the modern marvels of the 20th century, the iron birds, all of a sudden grounded to the ground and could not move. we then understood the reality of what it is to have businesses with zero revenue but continued expenses. And that is the reality of those countries that are as dependent on tourism and travel, and to a lesser extent trade, as we are. Many of us in this region, many in the Pacific. Mr. Speaker, I stand here today to you, conscious that this is going to be a rough year, but a year that I know we will succeed in getting through. And why is it rough? I've told you the pandemic, I've told you the risk of the crisis, I've told you the continued macroeconomic framework that we are managing. Mercifully, we have been able to make adjustments to the BERT program and will continue to do so as required, but we have made adjustments that would see us move away from a target of 6% of primary surplus to a 1% primary surplus, which is an adjustment of just over $500 million. But in addition to that, we recognize that we still have to be vigilant for all that is happening around us, because no one can tell you that they know what will happen or how it will happen. And this is globally. The advanced economies are likely to face declines between 10 to 15% of GDP, especially in Europe. The United States of America has been forced to print money at a level that is hitherto unknown. In fact, I don't know that our minds can come around and get around the figures. And there is talk even of further packages to come as they potentially face more difficulties. We have already seen in the months of April and May a decline of our revenue of 31% for the months of April and May in this fiscal year, and an increase in expenditure of 21% because of critical expenditures related to health and to water in particular, if we are to be able to solve and to resolve the issues with respect to water, particularly for those in the north and east of the island, and in some instances now in the south of the island, as we go forward, and to have that resolved, we hope, before the end of the year. It is going to be a difficult year, but it is a year that will not daunt the spirit of the Barbadian people, nor will not allow us to feel as though it can get the better of us. And why? The bill that I have the honor to introduce to this Parliament this morning reflects on a optional savings scheme that we put to the Barbadian public servants as an investment opportunity that would allow the government of Barbados to shift approximately in one fiscal year $100 million from wages and related expenditure to capital expenditure, which would allow the government, or that the old Ministry of Commerce building on Reef Road, or to be able to repurpose and to build back facilities in Bashaba for the vendors who cater and service the needs of all passing through that district, because it is still one of God's greatest creations on this earth, the view on that hill looking back over Bashaba Bay. I don't think that my heart will ever tire of seeing that view. Or for us to execute other critical aspects, such as expanding the pace of existing IDB projects, like the ones that are intended to make sure that government buildings convert to smart energy, whether it is through air conditioners that will effectively use far less energy, or photovoltaic panels that will allow us to be able to reduce the volume of fossil fuels that we import into this country and use foreign exchange to import into this country. These are the types of capital projects that we will undertake, while at the same time facilitating for the private sector who have projects that are shovel-ready, those projects such that we can reduce the number of Barbadians who have lost their jobs since the beginning of this year because of this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, everybody looked forward to 2020 as that year that had a special zest and ring. Not just in Barbados. In Barbados, we were committed to the gathering, and we still are. And we shall continue to gather because it has shown that we will remain focused, or we have shown that we will remain focused on what we have set out to be, because we know that obstacles will come. In the words of Marvin, so much obstacles in my way. But we will shove and push through. We will go over, we will go under, we will go around, we will do that which is necessary, but we will do it together as a people. And that is the critical point. So I have come to this honorable chamber today not for a lot of long talk, sir, but first and foremost, yes, to pilot this bill, which essentially provides for a framework for Barbadian public servants to opt in or out, fully or partially, zero or all. It's their decision as to what portion of their salary, so long that it is not over 25% of their emoluments after NIS taken out and other statutory deductions, for them to decide. Most people will probably opt to decide for the full 18 months. But there are some who may decide in shorter periods because of their circumstances. And what we have tried to do with the help of the union movement, the labor movement of this country, is to craft something that meets our needs as a government, which is to want to create the additional economic activity for those who have lost their jobs in the private sector, to be able to get an opportunity to work again, allowing the country to build capacity while the world seeks to find a therapeutic or a vaccine for the COVID. We're not sitting down twiddling our thumbs. We're building the capacity so that when the world is fully flowing and functioning again, they will meet a Barbados that is much stronger, much more agile, much more capable, and much more impressive in terms of what we have been able to do while others were sleeping. Similarly, we recognize that an unemployment rate that goes from just over 9.5% where it last was at the end of last year to what we suspect, and we don't have the number figures, but based on our rough calculations, we anticipate that just under 20% of the workforce would have lost their jobs based on the NIS claims that we've seen. But we will wait the official unemployment figures. But we would not be surprised if we are on or about a level of unemployment of 30%. Unheard of in the modern history of the last few decades. And caused not as permanent structural unemployment, but unemployment triggered as a result of a cessation of business, literally zero revenue for so many different entities, either from the reduction of international travel, then the cessation of commercial air travel, and then the cessation of economic activity during the month of April with the curfew and restricted movements that the government was forced to implement as a result of the advice of the public health officials. So, Mr. Speaker, when this first started, it did not look like this. It didn't. But this government was responsive enough to what others in the social partnership put on the table, in particular the labor movement. And we recognized that it made sense and that it was a win-win, not just for the government, but for them. Because it took into account the individual circumstances of each public servant by ensuring that by giving them the option and by us creating a mechanism whereby the central bank could then facilitate others who would wish to purchase, either to be identified by the public servant, as you will see on the form, or to be determined by general demand by those who make known their interest to buy the bonds, particularly the credit union movement of Barbados, and to a lesser extent, individuals, including some public servants who have said that they are prepared to buy from their other colleagues in the workplace. Because for whatever reason, they may be living at home, they may not have any children, they may have a capacity to save at a greater level, they may be saving to buy a house, they may be saving because they have children going to university in 3, 4, 5 years and they want to make sure they have some money put down. They may be saving because they want to do some renovations. They may be saving because they have somebody in the family who needs some kind of medical procedure that is difficult to find on island and that is difficult for them to be able to do without saving and contributing to the cost. I don't know. They may be saving because of all kinds of reasons, including wanting to jump in next year's crop over. It's their decision. It's their business. It is them to decide, Mr. Speaker. And it is against that background, therefore, that we recognize that by agreeing to this optional framework and by creating a mechanism that allows the central bank to play that particular role for us, that we have, in fact, Mr. Speaker, give me the bill. We have, thank you, Mr. Speaker, created a mechanism that can work for everybody. It necessitates us explaining, or it necessitated us explaining, thank you, to the country, but in particular to the public servants, what exactly was involved. And Mr. Speaker, I have been in public life in this country for 30 years. And I am accustomed to consultation. I am accustomed to rubbing shoulders. That has been the thing that I believe our generation, born in the early years of independence, had to accept that the meaning of democracy means that you govern not simply according to what you believe, but you move a nation as far as possible by bringing as many people along as possible. And that by bringing people along, the progress that you make is sustainable rather than simply carrying a few and the rest asking where you have gone. And what we have seen with this BOSS program is a unbelievable buy-in on the part of all those who were involved. I have never seen the level of consultation, in spite of the difficulties, in spite of the restricted movement difficulties. And I've seen the willingness of Barbadian workers and public servants to be consulted on a Sunday evening, on a Saturday afternoon, on a Monday night, on a Tuesday night, on a Wednesday night, on a morning, at the gymnasium for 2 whole days. We met people, 6 different sessions. Some of the ministers in here, the Minister of Education, the Minister of Health, and of course the Minister of Labor, who was with the Minister in the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Investment, at the center of the rollout and the very difficult and complex discussions and long hours. But you hear me talk about ministers, but I need to talk about the economic team. Because the truth is that it was the economic team carrying also the heavy weight. And you will forgive me if I place in the records of this House the commitment in particular of the senior economic advisor, Dr. Kevin Greenidge, who literally did every single session without exception, in order to explain the workings and the operational aspects of this bill, not just at the level of workers, but at the level of the central bank, at the level of the Ministry of Finance, at the level of the Ministry of Public Service. And I first and foremost say thank you to him and the rest of the economic team for putting us in this position. I say thank you to the unions. And I place on record for Hansard, because I believe that their commitment was stellar, given all that they are facing and given all who may want to taunt as well. The Barbados Workers Union, the National Union of Public Workers, the Congress of Trade Union and Staff Associations of Barbados, encompassing from the doctors, the Barbados Association of Medical Practitioners, the Barbados Nurses Association, the Prison Officers Association, the Police Association, the Barbados Union of Teachers, the Barbados Secondary Teachers Union, the APS and the BAPS, I forget the exact name, Association of Professional Public Primary School Principals, public secondary principals. You know, you get so accustomed to calling people by the acronyms that you forget the exact names. But I've worked with them for decades, so I know with whom about whom I speak. And there may be one or two associations, the air traffic controllers, but virtually everyone. And we met with them a number of times in the social partnership, initially outside of the social partnership, in a dedicated fashion. And I want the record of this country in this parliament to show the tremendous gratitude to the workers and their representative bodies in this country for allowing this Barbados to be able to be better capable of getting through this difficult period in this country's national development. We thank you, and not just the association and the workers, but we also thank those who were looking on as commentators, as members of the private sector, who understood that what the government is trying to do is to make sure that the burden can be shared as fairly as possible. And that it is not a case of only some working and the rest out there waiting and lolling and can't find anything to do and nobody looking after them. Not about here, not in this country. We go down together, we rise together. That is the Barbadian way. Or as I have said recently, this is who we are. This is who we are. Now it has necessitated some changes, Mr. Speaker. And the bill is not a very long bill, but the bill defines for us very clearly what it is intended to do. It is sunset legislation, and the Attorney General will have the chance. In fact, today we have two pieces of sunset legislation, and typically we have sunset legislation when we only need the laws to apply for a limited period of time. This BOSS scheme is intended to last only for 18 months, and it is intended to allow workers to opt for bonds, each of them as strip bonds. Each month typically is a strip bond. So it gives you ultimate flexibility as to what you want to keep, what you want to sell. You get full money on the day that your salary is due, so that it is completely at par. And the reality is that if a person says, I need all of my money, they get it all. If they say, I'm prepared to allow X amount to be savings, that is the case. But what we did, Mr. Speaker, was to target first and foremost those people whose net pay after statutory deductions is $36,000 a year or more. In other words, you're carrying home $3,000 or more after you deduct income tax and NIS. And we did it not because we are excluding those earning below, because those earning below can choose to opt in if they so desire. But we recognize that those earning below constitute the majority of persons who are more likely to be interested in a government housing program, a government-sponsored housing program, or one which the private sector may have, because we recognize that that category of person is the person who has been most excluded from ownership of houses in this nation, and we want to correct that wrong as we go forward as a nation, such that they are not tenants in their own land, but owners of property in the nation of their birth or adopted citizenship. So, Mr. Speaker, those people can opt in, but the obligation is not there on them, and the focus is not there on them. Similarly, the bill provides for some pensioners, because we had some pensioners say that we would like to opt in to be able to purchase too. And those government pensioners are also on the bill of government, and hence that diversion of expenditure from statutory payments to pensioners would equally be diverted to the capital expenditure for which we are doing this entire program. We cannot commit to all of them, but we said to the extent that there is room. And why? Because this bill places a cap of $8.5 million per month in the number of bonds, because drunk or sober, mind your business, we now come out of a program that had us at the third most indebted nation in the world. And we have no desire, even as we stabilize, to go back there now or any time in the future of this nation. But we understand that to get out of this moment, we may have to do some things, because the economy is not yet where we need it to be in terms of strength and stability to be able to do this. Having said that, may I say from where I stand that we are far better poised than many to be able to endure the crisis. And it is largely because we took the corrective action as a nation early on, from the very onset. Within less than a week in office, this government announced to the world, 1 week after the Attorney General and I was sworn in, that we would, one, cease to pay our international debt instruments, because we were going to restructure our debt, because our reserves and our debt situation was completely unsustainable. And that when we asked once again the Barbadian people what to do and how to do it, and if they were on the journey with us, they answered virtually all to a man or woman, yes. And what hurts in a sense is that not only did Bajans, that's why I tell you that today I give this speech with a certain amount of pride and goose pimples, because this is not the first time that this government has asked Barbadians to walk with them. And the last time we asked Barbadians to walk with us, they did. And not only did they walk with us, but we achieved and continue to achieve remarkably so in the eyes of the international community, such that, Mr. Speaker, even in the middle of this pandemic, Standard & Poor's came out and gave this government a stable outlook in the middle of a pandemic as a small island developing state. There were others that were downgraded to negative. They held our rating and gave us a stable outlook. Mr. Speaker, it is an amazing statement of confidence, not in the government, but in the people of this nation. Because the combined efforts of the government, the labor movement, the private sector, the civil society, the non-governmental organizations, the churches, ordinary human beings, walking in step, this is who we are. And we thought that we were far from that moment, as I said, only to be told, go back to the start line and run it again. At this time when you're running, hold 30 pounds on each leg and 50 pounds in each hand. But not even that extra 160 pounds can stop us from not getting to the finish line, because together we shall get there. Mr. Speaker, we anticipate that the uptake will be reasonable. I've been in public life, as I said, 30 years. In one instance, one union, when they did the poll at the end of the session, had 95% of the people there supporting it. I think that was the Barbados Secondary Teachers Union. I'm told that the National Union of Public Workers had a general meeting last week, and that they had 497 people on the call for the general meeting. That at the end of the day, they had 3 abstentions and 494 people voting for this. These are the kinds of numbers and the kind of support that cause us to know that this is truly a boss program for a boss people. There's a document that I will make a document of the House, sir, and it's an electronic document, and I will ask that it be made available on the Parliament website, that sets out in very simple language for all what is involved in this program and how they can opt in and opt out. It is not a pay cut, but for the avoidance of doubt, we say that this legislation is not constrained by any other piece of legislation on the laws of Barbados. It is also being passed consistent with Section 49 of the Constitution for the avoidance of doubt. Because while we are here doing this, we are conscious that there may still be some who may want to question or dispute. And we are making it clear that the people of this nation through this Parliament have determined that they want to work together as each other's brother and each other's sister in solidarity to allow us to get to the point next year with our heads above water. This is because sometimes in life you have to slow down. You can't run at the same pace all the time. And all we are doing now is essentially asking the population to do what you can, how you can, if you can, to help us become fitter, to help us become stronger, to help us become more disciplined, to help us become more creative. And in a sense, this is why we are choosing to focus on structural changes that will build up that capacity. So the capital works I spoke about, the buildings, the schools that have to be, and we will spend about just over $20 million on those schools because we've had to take some money back in order to be able to deal with the tablets and the online learning environment, because we have to be able to ensure that by September our children can effectively be totally and completely covered, because this government will not agree to 2 Barbadoses under any circumstances, and education is the one way. Education is the one way where we have allowed people to be removed from any constraints or circumstances of birth that would have precluded them from being able to have the best life that they could have. Education is the Barbadian way of being able to extricate people out of poverty. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we will ensure that we will also move aggressively on the digitization of government's records. All this paper. Parliament now has far less than it used to, but it's still got a little too much for my liking. And I like the trees a little too much. I don't think that I have touched a paper file for the last few weeks. And invariably for the last 18 months, the number of paper files that I have written on have been very, 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 very few, because our government took a decision within 6 months of being in office that we wanted to be able to move as much as possible to a paperless environment. And the amount of savings that are generated from that, even just in terms of messengers, moving documents from ministry to ministry, the gasoline, the diesel, the various people in the civil service. And I understand that we have to ensure, as we go into this paperless environment, that we have the proper records and the proper accountability and the proper transparency, and we're in the process of doing that. But in a lot of instances, while you can send things that are new easily, if you have to go back to do the research on the files, if those files are not digitized, you're back at the same paper. And whether it is central government or the state-owned enterprises, we have to do it. And a lot of the persons, and that's why we said we were working, we have a loan from the Inter-American Development Bank of $40 million US that covers a range of things related to the digitization. But we recognize that this is opportunity for a number of young people or older people to get work who hitherto have not been working in the last few months, or may have come out of whatever sector that is not yet opened back its enterprises, for them to be able to get some work. And of course, there's the issue of training. Everybody knows about homework, from the smallest child to the oldest student. And this is time for a lot of homework for us as a public service, for us in whatever sector we work in this country, in the private or public sector. Now is the time to sharpen your skills. Now is the time to read and train. Now is the time for you to prepare and to think out of the box. Because Barbados will make it through COVID. And when we do, the platform from which we stand can't be here, but has to be higher, because the collective capacity of the nation will be better 1 year from now than it is today, because of the commitment of the people of this nation to work together on a common mission. So, Mr. Speaker, this program will get this country back on its feet in a way that will allow people to tell their children and grandchildren, you know what I like about this country? You know what I really, really like about this country? That when you're down, and the people that live around you, or that the people that is your family, or that the people that you work with, when they see you down, what they do? They come and offer a hand to help you back up. That is who we are. And I said to you that this bill does not call for a lot of long talk. The bonds will work seamlessly for those who choose to opt into the program. And we will pay attention to the detail. Today I have a meeting with the Treasury, the Central Bank, the Ministry of Finance, to go through all of the provisions again. And we're going to do a dry run, and we're going to go through it, because it will work in a way that makes sense. The opportunity to interact with public servants last week also allowed me, particularly with those in the health sector, those in the police, customs, to be able to remind them and to reinforce this government's commitment to the appointment of public servants who have been languishing in acting posts for way too long. We have already done it with a number of customs officers. When we came to office, there was something called a clerical officer in the customs that had a whole set of people acting for 22 years and basically doing customs work, wearing a customs uniform and being called a clerical officer. This government made them customs officers, clerks, for customs officers for. And I thank all of the unions who worked with us, including the one known to the leader of the opposition through his senator in the Senate. We worked together to create just over 170 posts for persons who had been in there, in some instances for 20 years. We did it and started doing it with the nurses. The Minister for Health will tell you And it is my duty as the Minister for the Public Service over the next few months to have as many people appointed in this country who have been in position for more than 3 years. This is not an idle promise. This is a journey on which we have embarked. There are those who are already on the side waving at the train, trying to get off the train. And we are going to make sure the rest get off the train as far as possible. We've said that so long as there is not a negative report, there is no reason not to proceed immediately and appoint those other persons who have been acting for over 3 years. And indeed, the Director General of the Ministry of Public Service has brought to my attention that in some instances there are medical requirements for medical reports by the CMO, etc. I said, look, let anybody who is a certified doctor provide those reports. Because if we have to go back and deconstruct the system and reconstruct it, as I keep saying. Because if not, all we will be doing is letting it bottleneck and humbug people who ready and who need to go and get a mortgage, who want to get on with their lives, who want to be able to even determine if this is the correct platform for them, or they want to shift. I am saying to you, Mr. Speaker, that I therefore hope and pray that this entire exercise, which has given us a chance to even reinforce those messages to the thousands of public servants with whom we met over the last few weeks, that I want them to keep faith and to recognize that in the same way others have been helped, that with the grace of God and with the passage of time, so shall they. Mr. Speaker, the same document that we have has examples, and I give you the commitment that anyone else who needs explanation or who needs to understand or who has questions beyond the frequently asked questions, that we are more than happy to provide them. But what do we hear? Mistress, a 4-year bond with 5% interest, but when I put my money in the bank, I be paying the bank to keep the money there. That's what the people tell us. That they're paying the bank to keep their money there. And we have done more in the last 4 weeks. And I turn to the Minister for St. George South because he will continue the excellent work on financial literacy than perhaps any other government has done in the history since independence, about bringing a population on as to how they can best manage their money and to be able to participate in a different market besides house and land. Our house and land is critical, don't get me wrong. My grandfather told me from early, land don't spoil. It don't spoil. So house and land is the first investment that most Barbadians will make. But you can walk and chew gum. You have house and land and you got little savings. You can leave a little in the bank or you can leave some in the bonds. You have a combination of the two. Then there may be some other opportunities that may come up later in the year. And we've said already that we probably will have to bring a national pandemic solidarity bond, to which those persons who are not public servants will have free access to buy, rather than being forced to only buy these boss bonds on the secondary market. So that we hope to be able to create opportunities for everybody, because at the end of the day, the country needs to stabilize. Why should a teachers' credit union in Iowa benefit from the rate of return? And I want to make this document here that shows the pricing of Barbados' bonds. From November 2017 right through. And to show you that even in the middle of this pandemic, the price on Barbadian bonds has gone back up. Now, if that's not confidence in the people of this nation, I don't know what is. So that, Mr. Speaker, when you look at that uptake there on both of the bonds, the prices have gone back up in terms of their trading. Now I say to you, therefore, that we know from children that not every day is sunny. But we got through rainy days and sunny days as children. And as adults, we continue to get through rainy days and sunny days. There are some days, however, that day after 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 day is pure rain. And you begin to ask yourself what's really going on. And it is at that point that solidarity and partnership causes you to know that you're not in it alone and that others will hold your hand and to help you to get through it. This BOSS program is one such program. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, as I said, that there are those across the region and the world who would love to be where I am today standing, as a leader of a nation that continues to tell the world that we know how to do it together and to put Barbados first each time. And as I said, to have had this experience twice in 2 years is the most humbling aspect of my being in public life in this country. There is nothing, and I want to say it definitively, there is nothing that will eclipse the pride that I have to lead a nation that on 2 occasions, in 2 short years, have chosen to recognize that their future is best working together, rising together, building together, being together, and spreading the love and joy, even as we disagree on some other issues. But when it really, really, really matters, we know how to put aside those divisions. We know how to put aside those disagreements. And I want publicly today, because I did not know, the problem with these masks is that I really believe is that it can hide identities. And you don't always recognize people as easily, especially in a large room. And I want to apologize to the leader of the Democratic Labour Party yesterday for not acknowledging her presence at a meeting that we had of the social partnership. Apparently she was there. And I really want to thank her for coming and to publicly apologize to her for not acknowledging her, because I did not realize, nor did anyone tell me that she was there. Even though she registers disagreement on this proposal, I think that the issue is probably that she's not had a chance to be properly informed by Dr. Greenidge and his team. But I can arrange that for her, and if she still wants. But suffice it to say that, look, in this matter, Barbadians have spoken predominantly. We do not expect every last person, but the preponderance of opinion, the overwhelming majority of people have said, we know the country is in trouble, we are prepared to play our part, and more importantly, we want our brothers and sisters who are right now without work to be given the best opportunity to sustain their families. And if the BOSS program can do that, while still giving us a return of 5% on these bonds, 4-year bonds, then we are with you on this. I thank the unions again. I thank the public officials again. I thank the ministers again. And Mr. Speaker, I ask that this bill be now read a second time, proud of the fact that if we master this BOSS program, then I know, like with everything else, we too shall succeed and pass through this COVID. COVID will not put us down. When all is said and done, B still comes before C. Also D, by the way. But B still comes before C. And we shall conquer COVID as one people. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable, the opposition. Somebody. Please turn on your mic, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to begin by saying I don't see my role here as to say to anybody in Barbados, don't sign on for these bonds. That is not my role. And so you will not hear me say to people, don't take these bonds. My role, as I understand it, is to put the alternative view and to help to create a fuller picture, to help Barbadian public servants to be as fully informed as possible so that each of them may make his or her choice. And that's what I seek to do. It is not good enough if we pursue the interests of the nation wholeheartedly to give only one side of the picture, to tell one side of the story, to point to what you perceive to be the positives and not identify some other considerations which one must take on board if one is to be empowered to make a mature and responsible decision in the interests of the country, but also in the interests of oneself. Mr. Speaker, for me, a cut by any name is still a cut. A cut, Mr. Speaker, a cut by any name.
On a point of order, and I say it once,
Honorable Minister.
the honourable member is misleading the House, and he's entitled to live in a land of delusion as he has since the 27th or 8th of May. But this is not a cut. And a cut means that a person gets reduced value. If the person receives 100% of what they're entitled to, and if the law ensures that that is what they are to receive, as this law ensures, I'd like to pass him a copy of the bill, because I'm not sure that he's read the bill, and could you please also print a copy of the document for him? Because then he will realize that he is completely, utterly misguided, at worst, and at best, delusional beyond what is normally associated with him.
And if she's done, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to continue. Because she who last spoke, the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast and the Honourable Prime Minister. So the Honourable Prime Minister can refer to me as he who is delusional, but I can't say she who last spoke. Mr. Speaker, she who last spoke. If she is done, then I will continue. Because a cut by any name, a cut by any name is still a cut. You may go to the doctor, and he may, in consultation, tell you that he has to do a little incision here. Mr. Speaker, he's planning to cut you. He uses the word incision. A cut is still a cut. Maybe designed, maybe.
Honorable member, continue, please.
May be designed to achieve a specific purpose, but a cut is still a cut. Even when the doctor says, uses the word incision. Trying to cut you, Mr. Speaker. Cut is still a cut. If you're dealing with the police, as you often do, Mr. Speaker, you may hear the frequent use of the word wound. Often, it is a cut. It is a cut. They charge you for wounding somebody, they charge you for cutting up somebody. A cut. By any other name, a cut by any name is still a cut. It is my humble view that the ones who are struggling here are the 28 over there. I allowed the honorable member to speak and ramble on for an hour. Did not interrupt. Went all over the world and back. Did not interrupt. 28 of them, and they can't sit still for one moment to listen. Because a cut by any other name is still a cut. Sometimes we may call them punctures, wounds, incisions, cuts. Cuts. They're cuts, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Please let the honorable member speak without interruption,
Mr.
please.
Speaker.
Please.
Mr. Speaker, they are cuts. They pierce the flesh. They're cuts. And you bleed. They're cuts. They are cuts. By any other name, a cut is still a cut. We say we're not cutting people's salaries. We are not cutting people's salaries. So in 4 years' time, they will get 5% interest on their investment. No reference to the change in value of money over time. Mr. Speaker, your dollar that you earn today will have the same purchasing power 4 years from now. You don't lose. You don't lose. You don't lose because the dollar has the same purchasing capacity 4 years down the road. So you're not losing. The inflation rate in Barbados today, Mr. Speaker, is over 4%, I think, and likely to trend up in the next few years. So what you earn today becomes subject to inflationary pressures down the road. No change, you earn the dollar today, it gets you the same distance tomorrow. A cut is still a cut, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what this amounts to, this bond issue, is an attempt by the government to borrow from public servants with a promise to pay with interest a few years from now. Where does the government get money to pay its debts, Mr. Speaker, in Barbados principally? So you lend the government money today, and they promise you a 5% interest in 3-4 years from now. And in 4 years from now, when they have to pay, they will tax you to pay, Mr. Speaker. A cut by any other name is still a cut. You all can sit there and try to fool the people of Barbados. My responsibility is to paint the fuller picture. Tell Barbadians that this is a loan, not an investment for them primarily, but a loan to the government of Barbados, which when it falls time for the government to repay, it will have to tax Barbadians to repay. So you'll be being taxed on your investment gains. Because how else is the government going to be able to pay you? So you're being taxed now on your gross income. And then they take a bond off the top of your head. And down the road, 5 years from now, they have to repay you on what they call your investment. They are not saying to you that we will have to get that money from you to pay you back. Mr. Speaker, a cut is still a cut. They can jeer, they can laugh, they can mock, they can jump up, but a cut is still a cut. And I'm not telling anybody don't sign on to any bonds. I started there and I repeat it. But I am saying, know that a cut is still a cut no matter what they call it. I reckon with that, you will have to be taxed in order to pay it. I was reading a little bit in the debates of the constitutional amendment brought by the BLP administration with reference to the business of cutting or varying public servants' salaries. Reference is made to the judgment of the Privy Council in the case of Gladwin Ophelia King. And it underscored the precept of public servants' independence from any financial pressure that a Parliament of Barbados can bring to bear upon them. And this is with respect to their salaries and property. That is still a precept that I would like to believe we hold dear. And in all of the fuss, all of the glitz, all of the bluster, we have to ask ourselves if what, in fact, we are doing here as a parliament is exerting pressure upon a targeted group of people in this country to interfere with the salary arrangements contracted through them, through their leaders, with the government of the day. The crux of that debate, and it was a platform mounted by this government, this administration in government at the time, and that is that the salaries of civil servants shall not be altered to their disadvantage. And all I'm saying in referring to that, Mr. Speaker, is this. You may not reduce my pay from $10 a week to $5 a week. That is an obvious cut. But if you put me in a position, where my $10 is perceived by me because you have so instructed, because you've so encouraged me to believe, that $10 is perceived to be an investment, and 4 years from now, I find the returns are not what I thought they would be, because the value of the money is not the same, because I'm being taxed at that time to pay myself for that investment which I made. If at that time inflation has trended upward and therefore the dollar doesn't stretch as far because prices are higher, what you have done is put pressure on me to put me in a position where my money earned is not, the money which I earned or expected to earn is not what I thought it would be. You have put me at a disadvantage. Now they can deny that all they want. Simply saying, civil servants must consider whether or not, even if they take up this quote-unquote option, whether or not 4 years from now they have not been put in a position of disadvantage, because you have to be taxed to pay, because inflation kicks in, because the value of the dollar has changed over time, and because you're paying for your earnings out of your own pocket, if you understand what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker. Now that is putting people at a disadvantage. And the crux And the crux.
Honorable Member for St. James North.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on a point of order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition is misleading the House. The Honourable Member is putting himself in the position of a clairvoyant. I know he might be a bishop,
Oh, I see.
but
I see.
I don't know how anyone knows what's going to happen in 5 years' time.
Oh,
But
exactly
the fact
point
of
I
the
made.
matter, sir, the historical facts are that the Barbados Labour Party government, of which he was then a member, of course, prominent member, not only, in fact, did not raise taxes to repay the 8%, which was deducted from every public servant's salary under a Democratic Labour Party administration, not only did not raise taxes to repay that, but in fact paid back those public workers the emoluments that had been deducted, even after the same case that he just quoted of Philia Kingser. That is not the record of the Barbados Labour Party, to raise taxes to repay public servants whose salaries were deducted or who have invested in government bonds. So, as I said, he has put himself in the position of being a clairvoyant. In other words, he's now playing God to know what will happen in 5 years' time. I know he's a bishop, but I didn't know that bishops had that power as well, sir. But what I'm saying is, what I do know is that it is going against the historical record of the Barbados Labour Party in government to be making the suppositions he's making, sir, and he's misleading the House, and he's really being unfair to the people of Barbados, who have clearly shown that they agree. I mean, if out of 500 people, 497 votes, I mean, we're all politicians. We came in here by the votes of the people of Barbados. And if 497 are public workers, members of the Barbados Public Workers Union vote, 3 abstentions, sir. I think he's being unfair, sir. And I wouldn't want to say treasonous or unnationalistic, sir.
Making a speech.
But I think the Honourable is misleading the House.
Honorable, continue. Honorable Leader of Opposition, please continue.
I really, Mr. Speaker,
Honorable Member, continue.
I am continuing. Sir, I really apologize on behalf of the honourable member for that unfortunate delay of the House. Everybody knows that government earns money from taxes principally in Barbados. And then when it comes time to repay on this investment, it is the consolidated fund, the taxpayers' money that will be used to pay them back. And I am no clairvoyant, sir. I am simply saying, if you look at the indications, right now, it is very likely that you're going to have problems with inflation. You're going to have problems with change of value of money when you get down the road. Clairvoyant involved in that. Equally, he is not to suggest that that will not be the case. But yet the government is making Barbadians believe that everything in the Barbadian economy at that time will be hunky-dory. So we'll be able to repay this. Not a problem at all. I would invite persons just to cast their minds back not too far. Recent memory. And they would recognize what we're talking about. When you put your money out there, you may not get it back as you think. That's all I'm saying. And that point should be made by those who want to propose this for people so that they understand the risks involved. Now, Mr. Speaker, I would like for you to tell me if these bonds are so attractive, why are they not being offered generally to the public on the open market? And why are public servants being made the primary targets a captive audience. And don't, you have beneficiary if you want, primary targets. And don't come and give me this fluff about other bonds to come later in relation to housing. Probably we can talk about that too when the time comes. But why are public servants being singled out? We can get back to that if they are so attractive. Well, maybe they're not as attractive as we may be made to think, and therefore maybe the government senses that they will not get ready acceptance out there on the market, generally speaking. Public servants are a captive audience. You see, there's something called the fear of victimization. And everyone who sits in this house as an honorable member involved in political practice and culture in Barbados knows that this fear of victimization, knows that the practice of victimization is a prominent dynamic in our political culture and practice. And so the fear of victimization is real, especially for persons in acting positions. You can imagine that. In temporary positions. Persons who believe that soon, perhaps promotion is coming my way. Persons who hear it said that we are going to be appointing everybody unless there's something significantly dark to preclude that. We will be appointing everybody shortly. You hear that? You don't want to miss out on appointment by vexing the government. These are realities. Dismiss them if you want. Giggle and laugh and sneer if you want. But these are realities. Even people who operate at the highest level of Barbados fear victimization. Even people who are not part, centrally so, of the political process in Barbados fear victimization. A lot of professional people out there fear victimization, especially in a context where you have a government with this kind of numbers. So don't tell me that the fear of victimization is not a dynamic to be seriously considered in this whole equation. Don't tell me that. People feel vulnerable and people feel pressured. When people feel pressured, it is the few who are able to stand and resist the pressures and be counted. The majority give way to those pressures. Now we are told that this is an optional savings scheme. Now you have not given me a clear explanation as to why an optional savings scheme has a default position where you are in the scheme and the choice must be that I get out. Explain that to me, man. And that man is not addressed to you, sir. Explain to me why the default position is that you are in. And if you want not to be in, you have to sign out. Now what nonsense is that? Why can't I simply sign in if I want to be in? It's a boss scheme. You're familiar with these kinds of words, Mr. Speaker, because you had boy days. You used to play. You used to play. You know what a boss crook is? You know what a boss crook is? Well, you borrow those types of terms. And you apply them sometimes in situations which you think are sanctified. So this is a boss scheme. Barbados optional savings scheme. But the default position is whether I like it or not, they put me in. And I have to sign out. And Lord knows the bureaucratic lethargy is such in Barbados that I may sign out today and it does not come into effect till 8 months from now. We know that these are realities. Tell people these things Why is it that the default position is that I am in, and if I want to get out, I have to get out? Now in section 14 of this thing, Mr. Speaker, there's the bill at 14.3. Every public officer who does not wish to receive his bond allocation shall so indicate in writing in the form approved by the minister. So you have to sign out. No, you ain't signing yourself, you know, but you got to sign out. You didn't check it yourself, but someone else check you in. You got to check out. You go to the hotel, Mr. Speaker, you check in, and when you're ready, you check out. No, they're checking you in here. And if you so desire, you check out, or you express a desire to check out. We're not too sure. It may be like the Hotel California, that's the name. But you go and check out. Point 4, paragraph 4, clause 4. For the avoidance of doubt and in the interest of clarity, where a public officer fails or refuses to indicate in writing whether he wishes to receive a bond allocation or not, he shall be deemed to have chosen to receive his bond allocation. You understand? Yeah, get up. You in, you in.
Honorable Member St. Joseph. Mic is not on.
I don't want to say the honorable member is misleading the chamber. I know for sure he can read. But it is a grievous thing to leave off the last two words. He shall be deemed to receive, he shall be deemed to have chosen to receive his bond allocation in cash.
Leave off that. I read
In
that.
cash, it's here. Now, I don't know if it's not in the one he has. Sorry, not he, the honorable member. But if he's going to read, he should read the entire thing. A little learning is a dangerous thing. A little reading is even worse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing that. Because, well, I won't even go there. I think the records of this house will show I read every single word. I read every single word. He shall receive his bond allocation in cash.
Honorable Member, you didn't say that. Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, I insist that I said that.
You did not, Honorable Member.
Mr. Speaker, I insist that I said that. Proof otherwise.
You want the records there? You want
And it makes no substantive
You
difference.
say that.
The point is this. Even if I had left off those words, the point is this. You sign in, you are signed in, and you can only sign out. And if you refuse or forget to sign out, you are deemed to be in. That's what it says, and it's supposed to be optional. That is the essence of it. The essence of it is, Mr. Speaker, you have to sign out, but they sign you in. Why is that? Deal with that part of it. Forget the in-cash business. We understand that if you're out, you're going to get your cash, and that's another story that we'll deal with in a short while. But why we have to be signed in the first place? You understand, Mr. Speaker, that they're going to sign you in? And that will remain the case until you sign out? You understand that, but it's optional. It's optional. You know, Mr. Speaker, everybody in Barbados ought to know that part of the issue with which the government struggles is that it has to cut its wage bill. It has to cut its wage bill and keep it in check. Has to cut its wage bill and keep it in check. Now, this is the government that gave a 5% increase to public servants. They gave, and I supported that too. The same government that is now looking via this boss move to retrieve some of that 5%. The government has a challenge with reference to its wages bill. Understand what is happening here, Mr. Speaker? An attempt to deal with a challenge of an unacceptably high wage bill. That is probably IMF opinion. This government, since its program on the bird is a homegrown program, is probably also of the view. So an attempt to pull back a bit. So it is shifting a portion of its wages bill from central government's books onto the books of the Central Bank of Barbados. That's what's happening. That is what is happening. You are shifting a portion.
On a point of order.
This will happen. This will happen 28 times, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member
At
for
least.
Church West.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is clearly misleading the House. Clearly, this is not any move to shift it onto the central bank's books. This is a bond issue of which then any person can then purchase the bonds through a secondary market. And further, this is an opportunity for people to get a better interest rate than any bank is giving them in this country at 5%. Mr. Speaker, all over the world, all over, but I just finish. All over the world, Mr. Speaker, people are known to get paid with shares in the company. This is nothing unusual. An opportunity to get a bond issue from the government of Barbados at 5% is a benefit to the people of Barbados. The member continues to mislead the House, and grievously so.
Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, maybe your member, and I like to engage him in debate, because I know he's coming from an honest position. He's often wrong, but he's always honest. Now, he would have to explain to the people of Barbados, if this is not an attempt to shift wages from central government's books to central bank's books, why is it if I opt out, bonds are still written in my name, go to the central bank, and the central bank has to give me the cash? Can you tell me that? Can you tell me that?
On a point of order again, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable
Yes, because the central bank acts like a broker. It's a clearing facility of which other people can come and purchase. It is not on the central bank's books.
Mr. Speaker, there's no need for any broker. If I opt out, central government pay me. No, but bonds are still issued in my name, and I have to get paid through central bank accounting. Is that not true? Why is that? That is not true. I suggest you go read the plan again. Mr. Speaker, it's an attempt to move wage numbers from central banks, from central government's books to central bank accounting. They have to explain that if it is not a desire to reduce the wage bill on the books, to make ourselves look better for IMF scrutiny, if it is not that, then explain to me, if I opt out, haven't been forced in, why doesn't central government pay me? Why do I have to wait for a second source of my earnings via the Central Bank of Barbados? You know, this was originally called forced savings. Forced savings. You think that name just came out of the blue? Intelligent people on that side recognized that they were forcing public servants into a position, and hence the name was coined, forced savings. But then it was very quickly recognized that that's a madness, because you can't sell a product labeled like that. So we moved from forced savings to national meeting terms. Somebody started to imagine things until it dawned, by the way, it doesn't fit the bill. It doesn't fit the bill. We know about national meeting terms. We know meeting terms in our culture, and this doesn't fit the bill. So eventually, in order to market this, to sell this to public servants, we say it's a boss scheme. A boss scheme that emanated somewhere in a boss mind. And now we have the Barbados Optional Savings Scheme. is because it is forced savings. That is why we have the default position at in, and I must try to get out. It is a response to government's challenge on expenditure relative to salaries and wages. Central Bank of Barbados is being used to finance civil servants' pay. The Central Bank of Barbados is being used to finance the pay of public servants, because it makes for better bookkeeping for central government. Central Bank now has to help you meet your current expenditure. Another criticism of the last administration, that they relied heavily on the central bank to help them meet recurrent expenditure. This is exactly what this measure is doing, is achieving. It is helping government to meet the recurrent expenditure vis-a-vis public servants, a portion of public servants' salary. So you criticize the other administration for using the central bank to help meet current expenditure, print money to pay civil servants fully. You haven't gone quite there yet, but you're doing the same thing. You're getting the central bank to pay a part of salaries expenditure on behalf of the government. Prime Minister Sandiford wanted to achieve a similar thing with respect to public servants' salaries. Early 1990s. The situation was different, but with respect to public servants' wages and salaries, position was the same. He needed to save some money. I was trying to read it. I think I saw he needed to save about $114 million. This government is telling us is what, 120, 122, 125, not far apart. A similar thing. The difference is this government is marketing its message and selling its product much better than the Sandiford administration did. What's the same exercise with respect to this? We want some space with respect to the expenditure attaching to civil servants' pay in Barbados. And so we are achieving, hopefully, the same thing he did, using, similarly, the method he sought to use when he cut salaries. He cut salaries. He cut salaries. Now, I saw somewhere in here that there's a ceiling on this per month with respect to the bonds, $8.5 million per month. I think I saw for 18 months. When I do the maths, and somebody has to explain because I'm sure I'm missing something. When I do the maths on 18 months at $8.5 million, I don't get any $122. I get $153 or something so million dollars. So maybe my unlearned mind is not capturing something there. But I see 8.5 listed in here as a ceiling for any month. We reach $8.5 million, even if you want bonds, then you can't get them for that month. And 18 months at 8.5 comes up to something like 153 million. And that 8.5 million thing is stipulated in section 7, I think section 7 of the bill. Not sure, but it can be checked. It also states, Mr. Speaker, that, and this is interesting, and I saw that this, maybe I missed it early, but this was something that seemed to be emerging relatively late. Because I recognize that in addressing the matter of those who fall below the 36,000 threshold, who want to opt in, they can opt in at any level, it's up to them, but you can't go past 25%. And that 25% does not only apply to them, applies to everybody. So when you opt in, I shouldn't say when you opt in, Mr. Speaker, when you refuse to opt out, and you're kept in, you can go to 25%. You don't have to settle for 17% or 18 or 19. And I wonder who there might be out there. I wonder who there might be out there that are willing to invest to that extent. That is also in the bill, section, the maximum value of bonds to be issued for the purpose of paying a portion of the emoluments to public officers or temporary employees shall be 25%. It is section 8, and it is on page 8 of the bill. Now, the debt restructure in Barbados of recent months has left, I hear the Prime Minister, the Honorable Prime Minister, referring to confidence overseas. I've heard this. I heard this from the Honorable Member for Christchurch East Central some time ago. I don't hear any indication of confidence on the ground at home. I hear today about somebody somewhere in some part of the States, and I've heard it expressed by the Honorable Member for Christchurch East Central previously, as I said, that the Barbados bonds are very attractive to people overseas, and the price is right, value is rising. And I don't hear references to local confidence in the domestic market. And I want to know how credit unions really feel about this, because they suffered some of the strictures of the restructuring, lost to about $30 million or so. I want to know how the banking sector really feels. I hear a lot of statements being bandied about this boy is on board and this boy is on board and these bonds are attractive. The banks want them, the credit unions have no problem. I don't know about that for sure. That might be wishful thinking on the part of some. But if there's confidence on the ground at home, please give me some indication as to where this confidence is reposed. Because from what I read out there, the debt restructure experience has left a loss of confidence in government securities. This government has rendered itself subject to a position now where its recourse for borrowing is through the institutional lenders, the IDB and the CDB, and of course the IMF. And these are the people who are lending us stuff now. There's no confidence, certainly in this domestic market, in my view, for these bonds. And perhaps that's why they're forced savings upon a captive audience, the public servants of Barbados. That's where I'm coming from. Perhaps the Honourable Member for Christchurch West can tell me this as well. He's a lot more learned than I am. And I want to know why the maturity date on these bonds, Mr. Speaker, extends to the 4-year period. I want to know why 4 years. Was it magic in 4 years? Was a miracle in 4 years? Is somebody on the other side clairvoyant to suggest that in 4 years' time, the Barbados economy will be in prime shape? And therefore, that's the best time to repair. Some measure of clairvoyancy on the other side suggests that that is why this date is chosen. Why 4 years, Mr. Speaker? I'll tell you what a political mind might think. And the political mind might be wrong, but I'll tell you what it might think. And I'll tell you what public servants need to consider. 4 years from now is just beyond the constitutional election date in Barbados. 4 years from now falls beyond the next constitutionally due election date in Barbados. Why are these bonds subject to a 3-year maturity period? Thank you, my man. Why are the bonds not subject to a... You're asking people to invest over the next 18 months. Why are the bonds not subject to a 3-year maturity? They have to ask the question. Because the full story the full picture has to be painted so people can make an informed decision. Why 4 years from now? Because that date falls beyond the next constitutionally due election in Barbados. And if we reach that date and this administration happens to win the election, it is then beyond the sanction of the electorate if it does not pay these bonds when mature. Well, if you want to go 10 years, go 10 years. You're not going to go 10 years because you can't hoodwink anybody into accepting that. But I'm saying conveniently, we can locate this maturity date 4 years from now because it is just beyond. What if it was 10 years? Because it is just beyond the next election date. And therefore, should you win, and the Barbados economy be somewhat in jeopardy or on the rocks even, or God forbid, there's some event that triggers hardship again in Barbados and put government's finances on the skid, you are now beyond the sanction of the electorate. Mr. Speaker, that's a reality. That is a reality. That is a reality. Barbadians will not forget that this government came to office. And we're not here discussing the merits of the action that the government took. But this government came to office. And shortly thereafter, there were layoffs. And shortly thereafter, there was increase in bus fares. And shortly thereafter, there was increase in a whole set of other taxes. Shortly thereafter, there was a restructuring of debt such that people felt pain, even at the level of pensioners in Barbados. Barbadians will recall that. So you do the wise-seeming thing, and you set the maturity date 4 years from now. The electorate can't touch you then if you happen to win the election. But of course, that's an achievement that you have to realize first. And that's not guaranteed either. And my friend from St. Philip North, you can shake your head in questioning and disbelief. St. Philip South, sorry. You can shake your head in questioning and disbelief. But, my friend, you've just come to the arena of elective politics, and I would suggest that there is a brand of wisdom that will descend upon you, and it will instruct you that there's much political intrigue in decisions and actions taken by government, and oftentimes those who are called upon to support those positions in the corridors of this hallowed chamber do not fully appreciate, know, or understand or realize the motivation of others. You support it in the interest of the collective. A word to the wise. A word to the wise. So just like they raise taxes, just like they raise bus fares, just like they laid off people in the first year after the election, just as they restructured debt on the premise of what they perceive to be absolute necessity, critical necessity. The question is, what becomes of this investment in these bonds 4 years down the road if we're facing issues in Barbados? Simply put, it is not as easy, breezy sailing as the government would want us to believe to accept these bonds. You have to weigh the pros and cons and see where you're prepared to put your foot. Mr. Speaker, the money raised from this has to go somewhere. I personally don't like where it's going. I think the full story has to be told as the way it is going. Anybody can throw out a few phrases like poor people and projects to better our capital infrastructure. But this is going to revolve around construction. It's going to revolve around construction. Mr. Speaker, you know, you're not in construction, you know. You don't own a construction company. You don't even know the difference, perhaps, between a chisel and a hammer.
I think you are rather wrong, Honourable Member.
And if you know, you should let me finish. And if you do know the difference, you're not certain as to their respective functions.
You're still very wrong, Honourable Member.
But there are those who are very familiar with the construction industry in Barbados, Mr. Speaker. They are now our captains of industry here. They are now the power brokers behind the thrones. And I say thrones and not throne. They're the ones who have the sway. They can have buildings moved almost overnight. They can have roads appear across streams were we to have them in Barbados. And this money will go their way. A few people, Mr. Speaker, will get some jobs. A few people will get some jobs, and that's a noble intention attaching to this purpose here. And we will try to make a dent in the unemployment levels which have risen alarmingly high in Barbados. We can't fool the people from the hotel sector that they will get jobs in construction because they are trained and skilled for that. But some people will get jobs, and some numbers will be occasioned out of that, but insufficient. Insufficient in terms of aggregate number, Mr. Speaker. But the vast majority of this will end up in the pockets of the privileged. Will end up in the pockets of the privileged, Mr. Speaker. We don't see them in here. They don't come to these events. But they hold such sway and power behind the scenes. These monies will largely go to their pockets to do with what they will. And again, largely, it's consumption and conspicuous consumption, not necessarily reinvestment. It goes to capital formation for them. This is where the money will largely go to financiers and friends in the construction sector. Employment gains will be minimal and will not absorb the type of job skills lost in the tourism sector as is being touted. Mr. Speaker, I have to raise an issue as to the role of the central bank in this exercise. Central Bank of Barbados. And I suppose this legislation attempts to provide a legal basis for the central bank to do what is being asked to do. I don't know that the central bank prior to this is able to hold individual accounts or accounts on behalf of individuals. I think there was some public furor about that with respect to one particular individual not too many years ago. You would know what I'm talking about, being a legal man yourself. So I don't think the central bank's role legally is established before this with respect to managing the accounts of individuals. They do, I think, have some authority to invest in government securities and other securities, and I suppose that is what the government intends to have them do with respect to this matter. A new authority for the bank to hold accounts on behalf of individuals. We have to be careful as to how our situation of governance allows administrations to relate to these important institutions in Barbados, Central Bank, NIS, etc. And so we're making, as I understand it, bonds are not legal tender. And again, the learned minds on the other side can correct me. I don't know that bonds are legal tender. From everybody I've asked, I have been told they're not legal tender. I suppose they're tradable. But I don't know that I can go in the shop on Bank Hall and buy some Milo with it. But I suppose we are giving legal tender quality and character to these bonds, notwithstanding any enactment to the contrary. For the purpose of this act, a portion of public officers' commandments may be paid in bonds with the consent of the public officer. And the lawyers in here who are very well schooled and who make absolutely no mistakes about anything will tell us that they are established under law as being legal tender. Because the government does not want to engage in the practice of making the law in Barbados through this institution and then flouting the law in Barbados through this institution. Mr. Speaker, I have to tell you, my layman's perspective on this is that this is a backhand way of printing money. Hello? I apologize for that, sir. I normally speak like that, and that's a bad habit I have. Hello? That's not, I apologize. But I have to tell you, my layman's mind tells me that this is a backhand way of printing some money. So we criticize the other administration for printing. But we seem to be, yes, I did too. So we seem to be doing a similar thing, a backhanded way. Because the central bank is now being asked to pay public servants wages. And it seems to me that that's a way of money supply to the government, the central government. And therefore, you may be printing some money without being bold enough to admit we need to print some money, or being constrained by your arrangements with the IMF or by your own action in this parliament of limiting your capacity to make recourse upon central bank supply. So you're caught in a situation where you can do it through this backhand way and you print the money. That makes it, Mr. Speaker, that makes it a forced instrument upon the Central Bank of Barbados. That makes it a forced instrument upon the Central Bank of Barbados. So this printing of money in this backhanded way through the Central Bank is being passed off as investment.
Mr. Speaker,
All remember Precious West.
on a point of order, Mr. Speaker, I really cannot sit down here and hear the honourable member continue to mislead the House. This is not printing of money. This is not an increase in the money supply of the country. It is no change in the money supply of the country, so it's not printing of money. Mr. Speaker, if a government issues treasury bills, and Royal Bank or CIBC or RBTT or any banking institution buys those, it is not the central bank that's producing, that is buying them. It is another institution. And this bond is just a longer lasting than a treasury bill, that's all it is. It is not the printing of money. The honourable member is misleading the House. He should, I would ask, Mr. Speaker, that it be struck from the record because he's misleading the House.
Continue on,
Yeah, I know that you would deal with that in the appropriate way, Mr. Speaker. I like to engage my honourable friend from Christchurch. But I said, he's very honest in his approach to things, even though frequently wrong. But I want to know what would happen. I want to know what would happen if these bonds are not taken up out there on the market. I want to know how civil servants are going to be paid. I want to know how civil servants are going to be paid if these bonds are not taken up. The ultimate responsibility then is reposed with the central bank to honor central government's liability to public servants. I'll tell you something, that's a real danger. It's not only about printing money, it's a real danger for public servants if these bonds are not taken up. Because the government has given the assurance, if you opt out, once we have opted you in, if you opt out, we will still issue a bond in your name and you will be paid immediately through the Central Bank of Barbados. Oh yeah? And if the Central Bank is not able to get those bonds traded, Mr. Speaker, what happens? The question is not what I'm going to do with mine. I've already made that determination. That's not for me to say here. question is, what will each of you do with yours? Because I know that in your heart of hearts, there are some of you who see this still as for savings because you would prefer not to go into this. You are doing it because you are part of a collective. You are doing it because you are a part of the team, a part of the collective. So it is a sense of being forced with which you are possessed in your bosom and in your spirit.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order. The honourable member cannot be in my mind and suggest to me what a reason that I am doing with my own bonds. That clearly is misleading the House. That clearly is misleading the House, and he has to withdraw it. He cannot tell me, he is not in my mind, and cannot tell me what I will do with mine. And for him to suggest that is misleading the House.
I remember he's just positing an opinion. That's all he's really doing. He's just positing an opinion, Honourable Member.
Keep getting up, but we got all day and night. Now, Mr. Speaker, if the central bank can't get those bonds traded, where does Gladwin Ophelia King get her money? To which the government has said with 100% certainty, you will be paid your money immediately. Only it will come via the central bank. People have considered that. I want to repeat a call, Mr. Speaker, I've made it several times for a change in the governance culture and structure around both the Central Bank of Barbados and the National Insurance Scheme in Barbados. It has been touted with repeated frequency that the last administration manipulated the systems, governance systems around both of those institutions. That has been said. So you come to the table, you should not put yourself in a position where you can easily be accused of doing the same. And all I'm saying is we need to take a look at the corporate governance structure around those key institutions, those two and others, to avoid political interference and political manipulation of the institutional policies. Now, Mr. Speaker, it is touted that this bond can't be restructured. Can't be restructured. We've heard it said, sounded loudly, repeatedly. These bonds can't be restructured, and we will protect these securities just as we did with the savings bonds of recent experience. Now, I asked one or two people who should have knowledge of these things. When you say a bond cannot be restructured, are you only talking about discounting and haircuts and shaves? Is that all you're talking about? Can a bond be deferred in terms of payment at its maturity date and it be considered not to have been restructured? The learned lawyers in here will tell us these bonds cannot be restructured. But what stops a government beyond the next election, if it comes to office, having made this commitment to the public service of Barbados, what stops that government in given circumstances from saying we can't make this payment now? Give us 2 more years. Give us 4 more years. I think there's a case before the court now. It was recently, Mr. Speaker, you're familiar with these things, of one man who was claiming that the last restructuring has so impacted him financially. I might be getting it wrong, but I think he's saying under the current system, if things hold, he can't look forward his money to his age 97. That was right. There are people who are in their 60s and nearing the end of their time in the public service. I don't know if this 4-year maturity date is appealing or attractive to them. And I do not know if they can stand the prospect of a deferral on that maturity date, although there's no restructuring, no haircutting, no shaving. These are things that have to be considered if the full picture is to be painted. Now, there's some who say that this government needs to be very reflective of the last arrangements negotiated with the IMF that allows us to reduce the primary surplus fiscal target from 6% to 1%. And that makes not a lot of sense, especially in a context where many other countries negotiated for better positions than that. And that we should have negotiated to a position where we could carry a small deficit. And that because we did not do that, we find ourselves faced with situations like these, where we have to shave the public service wage bill, shift it into capital projects to get a few things going so we can get a few people back to work. If you're going to tell the story, tell the whole story. If you're going to paint a picture, paint the full picture. I see that as my role to help to do that. Now, if you check, my friend, the Auditor General's report, there's something that has to be explained. We come back to that, and maybe I'm getting it wrong. I'm not an economist. But you check the current Auditor General's report. I know we have focused on the fact that $1.4 billion in wastage or whatever around BWA. We focus on that. Last week when we talked about CBC, we talked about a small amount in receivables that not properly accounted for. That's a small thing. But our General's report suggests that government has overstated its revenues. Now, I look forward to that being discussed and explained. I don't pretend to fully understand that. But it seems to me the Auditor General is saying that government overstated its revenues on last year. If you overstate your revenues, you can present a better picture than the reality actually should reflect. And you can overstate your revenues to make your expenditure side look better. Now, these are realities. These are realities with which we have to come face to face. So I really want to move on. I'm not sure about the role of the central bank. I don't know about the legal basis for paying people with bonds and that type of thing. I was reading some of the contributions of Arabara to debate in this chamber. Of course, not in this building. And one of the things he was saying, the administration of 71 to 75, that people should be paid in the coinage of the rem. People should be paid in the coinage, in the currency of the rem. I don't know that bonds before today constituted part of the currency of the rem. A couple of questions, Mr. Speaker. One of the Barbados Labour Party, since I left, one of the Barbados Labour Party has changed its philosophy as outlined in the Protection of Wages Act. Has changed their position relative to the Democratic Labour Party's attempt to cut salaries, make adjustments on salaries, and the position the party held on the constitutional amendment to public servant salary. Do you know that Mr. Prime Minister Standiford wanted to offer bonds? Did offer bonds. A lot of people forget that. The government of the day tried to use the mechanism of bonds instead of cash and instead of pay cuts. And it was debated down by this administration, who held fast to policies authored by people like Grantley Adams to ensure that people's salaries and wages were not messed with, that unscrupulous employers could not pay people in kind rather than the currency of the rem. So I want to know if the bringing of this legislation, this policy document enshrined in this bill, represents a shift away from that basic ideological, philosophical position which suggested that you should not mess with people's remuneration in this way. Sandyford wanted to reduce, as I think I intimated earlier, his expenditure bill by $114 million. He wanted to do it at a time when there were no foreign reserves available to Barbados, hardly. There are now $2 billion in foreign reserves, of which the country boasts and the government boasts. So the negative impact on tourism will diminish the earnings to which we had become familiar in recent years. The negative impact of the COVID experience will diminish those earnings. So you may see a dramatic slowdown in the earnings of foreign reserves. And that begs for me the question as to why, if that's the case, you want to use what level of financings you earn by shifting away from wages to put it into the type of construction that in part facilitates tourism and its re-emergence. When that re-emergence is very much in doubt, you will create further leakage. Construction relating to fisheries development could have been considered. Construction relative to weather resilience infrastructure could have been considered. But the emphasis here is on shift the money from civil servants, put it in capital works, facilitate tourism projects to hopefully get a few jobs. And I'm not too sure that that is a strongly put case. Now, Mr. Speaker, before I weary you, before I weary you, before I've already wearied them. Before I weary you, let me say a couple of things. The 1991 debate on salary adjustments in Barbados, and these are from the Hansard of Parliament. They're the chief spokesperson for the Barbados Labour Party. The government of the day is attempting to adjust civil servants' salaries. It had offered the mechanisms of bonds that had been shouted down. It has been so pushed into a negative financial position that they have to cut civil servants' salaries. That's the debate. Here's the chief spokesperson of the Barbados Labour Party. This is a declaration of hunting season on the poor and the middle class. This government does not want to be accused by its own voice in those terms. And so what is a cut by any other name is brought before the public servants of Barbados and passed off as an investment, when in fact it is a loan which taxpayers will have to pay later. Chief spokesperson for the Barbados Labour Party at the time, forced savings on people who can't meet their normal expenses. people with mortgage payments and other commitments. That is the voice of the chief spokesperson for the Barbados Day Party at the time. These are the considerations of importance to him. People with mortgage payments and other commitments, because there's a sense of pressure, may find themselves subject to this boss scheme when already they're struggling to meet their normal expenses. And yes, they have options. They can no, they can't go in or go out. They can opt out. You put them in. Don't say that. They can't go in or go out. You put them in. They can opt out. And they have options, and they can opt out and be paid by the central bank. And along will come, Mr. Speaker, along will come the vultures of this world and snap up those bonds at 5%.
Continue, Honorable.
You understand where I'm coming from, Mr. Speaker? Don't mind them laughing. They know truth, at least most of them. Some of them don't. Some of them don't. And they exist in blissful ignorance. That's all right. That's all right. But some of them do know the truth. And so this is Barbados Day Party voice of that time. Chief spokes, forced savings on people who can't meet their normal expenses, people with mortgage payments and other commitments, but you've issued a bond in their name from which they must opt out, and then along come your friends. And then along come your friends. There's a stony silence in the house, Mr. Speaker. And then along come your friends and snap up these bonds. Because here's the context. Here is the context. Here is the context. Here is the context in which these.
On a point of order. On a point of order.
Honorable Pressure, rest.
The honourable member is now totally not only misleading the House, but he's also misleading himself and seeking to mislead the public of Barbados. In the early part of his speech, he made it clear that the central bank is holding the bonds. Now he comes and tells us that our friends are going to claim the bonds. Which one is it? Is it friends claiming the bonds, or is it the central bank owning the bonds? He cannot have it both ways. He is continuing to mislead the House, and it should be struck from the record.
Continue, Honorable.
This honorable gentleman is a Barbados scholar, you know. I give way to his brand of wisdom any day. The context. How should I deal with it?
Honorable, continue.
You're telling me not to deal with it, Mr. Speaker?
Member, continue your speech, sir.
Because I do not understand why he should think that these two things are exclusive the one from the other. Anyhow, he is a Barbados scholar. Now, the context of these forced savings, of which that voice of that party then in 1991 just spoke, of people struggling to make ends meet, struggling to pay their mortgages, etc. People feeling a sense of being hunted because the season has been declared upon them. The context of these forced savings that we're discussing now: increased taxation, raising prices despite the removal of NSRL. And I voted to help remove that. But raising prices despite that. Increased water rates and garbage rates that public servants have been complaining about. Increased bus fares, increased bank charges, health levy, fuel pump increases that the transport sector has been complaining bitterly about, online transaction charges. That's part of the context in which these bonds are being offered to people on the basis, let me be charitable, of saying to them, this is an investment, and 4 years down the road, 5%. Here is the context here, you know. So the civil servant, public servant, who feels a sense of pressure, who feels a sense of vulnerability and exposure to the system, and feels therefore compelled to sign on, or not to sign out, I should say, because they already signed on. There's a context in which it's happening, you know, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has spoken of this as an investment. Well, I don't think she mentioned it today, but certainly she's mentioned it before, and others, I'm sure, would tout that point today, that this is an investment. I asked the question earlier, if it's really an investment opportunity for Barbadians, why only 14,000 public servants out of 130,000 workers in Barbados, at least before COVID? Why only 14,000 if this is such a useful investment? Answer, it's a simple mechanism to help government get from point A to point B. That's government's interest. But they have to sell it. So they label it investment and change the name from forced savings to boss scheme. Hey. Now, I just asked why 14,000 out of 130. Let me go back again to the debate of 1991. And another voice out of the Barbados Labour Party at the time. Of the 100,000 workers in the country, why were only 23,000 public servants targeted to make the sacrifice required then? Prime Minister began today by talking about how noble a sacrifice and a cause this is that we're serving, and how Barbadians come together in such a way to respond to this without much cajoling, that it almost brings her, she said she was proud, I shouldn't say it, but almost brings her to tears. That this is twice Barbadians have rallied like that. Yeah? We're going to question that just now. But his voice out in 1990, where's the hand, sorry? Same question I'm asking, why 14,000 public servants out of 130,000 workers in Barbados? Because they're the captive audience. You can touch them, you can't touch the others as easily. This was one Richard Cheltenham, known to you, sir. Sir Richard Cheltenham. He was Richard Cheltenham then. Sir Richard Cheltenham now. Of the 100,000 workers in the country, why were only 23,000 public servants targeted to make the sacrifice? Same question. Same question. Same question. The only difference is, back then, Erskine Sandiford called it a cut. Right now, we say it's a boss plan. Not the same. It's the same scenario. You're targeting 14,000 out of 130,000. Just as Sandiford targeted 23 out of 100,000 then. It's the same. Circumstances may differ, but it's the same strategy. There was one lady called Billy Miller. Dame Billy Miller now. She spoke to Mr. Speaker. She was concerned about intimidation and victimization. You think I am using those words just to be malicious or political? She used the same terms, had the same concern, and not she alone, I refer to one, two others. But she was concerned about intimidation and victimization of public servants by the then administration. She made an interesting point. You know, Dame Billy Miller, she was Billy Miller then. She said, Some people got no forms. Some people got 2 forms. We hear all kind of numbers bandied about, people agreeing. Some people got no forms. Don't forget, the legislation says if there's not a form showing that you opted out, then you are in. It's the speaker, they can refuse for some reason to send you a form. You are not accounted for, so you are in. Some people got 2 forms. So I don't know why I got 2 forms. I can sign twice. The form is saying the same thing. Maybe they made a mistake and sent me 2 forms. Maybe they didn't see the one I sent before, so I can sign another one. You're counted as 2 people haven't agreed. I'm just telling you what the discussion was at the time back then. Billy Miller says, no one knows who is scrutinizing the responses. No one knows who the counting agents are. No one knows who the returning officers are. But Prime Minister comes in here and gives us numbers that the majority of public servants already agreed to this. This thing's still being explained, The process now gotten started, at least I think so. But we already know that the majority, I hear about 92% of a certain subsection of a union. 92%. I don't know how small the subsection, but 92% agree. So that means majority of the union agree. We're in which world? I hear today 500 people, public servants, attending a meeting staged on a questionable legal basis, as far as I'm being informed. As far as I'm being informed, the meeting was not properly summoned and constituted. And 500 people, we are told, 500 people, we are told, a virtual meeting, I think it was. 500 people, we are told, attended, and only 3 abstained, 497 agreed. And then we are told the majority of this union has signaled its agreement with this. This union got about 8,000 people, This union has about 8,000 members. 500, a questionable, a nebulous number, attend a questionable meeting. And then it is said that 497 agree, and that represents the majority of 8,000 in which world? Now, people have to treat to this thing individually under the law. No union can agree to this for me or you or you or me. You have to agree on your own. So tell me how in a union of 8,000 members you can say in questionable circumstances you had the support of 497 and therefore the majority. You cannot give people the wrong impression in an effort to sell your product. There's a guy called David Simmons. He's now Sir David Simmons. It seems as though you get these titles when once you've said the right things in the Parliament of Barbados. Yeah? One fella called David said, Mr. Speaker, I know when laughter is genuine. I know when it expresses a discomfort and a level of guilt. I know when laughter is an expression, a gesture just to buoy your colleagues. I know, so let them laugh. But the people out there will speak and make their own minds. I said at the beginning, I'm not here to tell anybody don't sign out. I'm simply here to give the added picture so that people can be best informed to make their decisions.
Mr. Speaker, sir. Raised on a point of order, sir. So we sat down and listened now for an hour and a half to the honourable leader.
And I haven't finished yet.
The honourable leader of the opposition. I mean, he has unlimited time, of course. He could speak till midnight tonight. No problem. We'll be here. But, sir, I think, sir, that we should still maintain a certain level of decorum in the Parliament. And I can't say that sir, when I was an opposition member of parliament and not now as a government minister, sir. We can't say, sir, a fella called David Simmons, sir. We have to show more respect than that in our own, sir. Sir David Simmons, sir, a former Chief Justice of Barbados, sir. And again, sir, I mean, earlier on he said Sandyford, sir. I mean, sir, is whether you like him or not, sir, Sir Lloyd Sandyford, former Prime Minister of Barbados, sir. If we don't treat ourselves, sir, and people who have made a mark in this country, sir, with certain decorum and respect, who will treat us or anybody else, sir? And so I think, sir, as a minister of this government, sir, I have to rise and say that, sir. A certain decorum must be maintained, sir. It can't be David Simmons and Sandyford, sir. These are people, sir, who have served at the highest level. So I have to intervene, sir.
Continue, Honorable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, I have the highest regard for people who have served this country at this level. I have made public statements to the effect that former prime ministers of this country, and this was with specific reference to Sir Lloyd Erskine Sandyford, former prime ministers of this country have to be treated in a far better fashion than we do. I have the highest regard for Sir David Simmons. I worked with him for a few years as his parliamentary secretary, so there's no disrespect intended over here. The honourable member for St. James North has got to be able to understand language and expression. When I say a fella named David Simmons, that is not signaling any disrespect.
Continue, Honorable Member.
So the Prime Minister does not refer to me as he. She is not a she. She is not a she.
Honorable Member, you've gone past that. You've gone past that, Honorable Member.
She started it again.
Honorable Member, you've gone past
They
that.
started it again. The Prime Minister is a she. Is she not?
But Honorable Member, you've gone past that, Honorable Member.
I don't understand the use of the pronoun she. If I say the Honorable Prime Minister in one sentence and the next sentence says she, that is standard use of grammar. Fellow called Sir David Simmons, but he was not Sir David Simmons then, sir. He was David Simmons, MP then, member for St. Thomas. Member for St. Thomas at that time. You know what he said? He said this. You said 10,000 people support this option for a cut. But that is 10,000 out of 22,000. How is that a majority? That was his concern. You said 10,000 support the cut. But how is 10,000 out of a public service then of 22,000 or thereabouts a majority? And we hear it said in this chamber that 497 people and 92% of some small subgroup of a larger group constitutes a majority of public service in Barbados. And the support is so overwhelming that it is overwhelming. The more things change, the more they remain the same. This is the same arguments from back then. There was a gentleman called Henry Ford out of Christchurch West, now represented by my learned friend. He's now Sir Henry Ford too. Here's what he said. These are his words. This is Hansard. These are his words. We are coming to see a Burnham-style government envelop Barbados. That's what he said back. This was his concern. We are coming to see a Forbes Burnham style government envelop Barbados. I pray to God, these are his words, that Barbadians will have the common sense in time to get up and speak out. He was concerned that there were no safeguards for the secrecy of the vote taken by the public workers in this country. He said, I have never known any proper poll or referendum taken on anything anywhere where people had to sign their names. He said, and these are his words, the Prime Minister must know that in a small community such as Barbados, there is the constant fear of victimization. Same concerns 30 years ago. He said further, hear me carefully, paying people in bonds is unconstitutional. Sir Henry Ford became leader of the party in administration today, leader of the opposition, a legal luminary in this country. Hear him. Paying people in bonds is unconstitutional and against the Protection of Wages Act. That legislation was put on the books in 1951 to ensure that unscrupulous employers could not pay workers in other than the coin of the realm, legal tender, as the leader of that party some years ago. He went on, if Prime Minister Sandiford says that public servants have to be paid in bonds, tell him it is contrary to the laws of Barbados. It is also contrary to the Constitution, which established right of protection of property, and salary or money is property. We will fight the DLP legally every step of the way. That is not only Henry Ford, that is Sir Henry Ford. But there was a fella in that parliament then called George Payne, the Honorable George Walton Payne. He spoke then too, doesn't speak now, but he spoke then. He says, this measure undermines the sanctity of the trade union process and the movement, and it raises query about the relationship between unions and political administrations. Same concerns that people have today. This is the Honorable George Payne then, in the 1990s. There is a fellow called Delisle Bradshaw, whom I have here listed as Braddy. There's a fella, and the reason I have him here listed as Braddy, because to me it's a note that carries a sense of endearment. There's a fellow called Delisle Bradshaw, Honorable Delisle Bradshaw then. He does not have a sir behind his name, but he spoke too. And he also spoke to the matter of concern about undermining organized labor. So he and the Honorable George Payne were on the same page. He spoke about the undermining of organized labor in Barbados. Mr. Speaker, people today are very concerned about what some see as the undermining of organized labor. Unions, labor unions, were birthed in a context of struggle. And one of the reasons why the old colonial regimes and the plantocracy interests of the days gone by allowed for labor to organize itself was because it felt that you can the Alderman member said Michael East would know about these things. Where is he? You can institutionalize the struggle. You know about these things, Mr. Speaker. You studied sociology and sociological development and political history, I imagine. So we were allowed to have unions so that the struggle could be institutionalized and straitjacketed so that you could better counter the struggle or retard its progress. There are those who believe that the big process of consultation and social partnership today is being used to retard the impulse of the struggle, to reverse the gains of the struggle of organized labor. That belief is out there. That perception is out there.
Honorable,
Mr. Speaker,
Give it up.
I raise on a point of order because I believe the honourable member is misleading this chamber and the general public. I have listened to him call the honourable member, Dila Bradshaw, who I know very closely, and has sought to connect certain comments made in a debate, I believe back in 1991, in such a way to this debate as to give the inference that he in some way is not supportive of the current piece of legislation before this chamber.
How you get to that?
And I would want the record to reflect that my consultations with the Honourable Delilah Bradshaw is nowhere near drawing that conclusion, because in fact he totally supports this particular piece of legislation. And I will go further to indicate to you that in this situation there has been no undermining of organized labor, because just as he, and I want the honourable member would know this, because the said member of this, former member of this chamber, was also the Minister of Labour. And at the time when this debate would have been before this chamber, because I remember walking with him in protest against the salary cut, and I believe the honourable member was there also walking. His references to undermining the labour movement was also because at that time it was clear that the attack was really on persons who were in the public sector. And for that, he would have spoken to the attempts by that administration to undermine organized labor. I want the other member to understand that in the course of reaching to this point today, there has been extensive consultation with the labor movement. Extensive consultation, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member would do well to not mention persons who are not able to defend themselves in this chamber, but to know that so long as I am here and the daughter of Delilah Bradshaw, I will defend his record.
Sometimes I think some honourable members lose a sense of perspective. I am not associating the former honourable member of this chamber, Minister of Labour, Honourable Delilah Bradshaw, with this bill here today in any way. I'm simply drawing parallels out of the debate and the discussion. That's all I said. You can infer what you want. What I said was discussion took place at the time, and part of the discussion parallels with what obtains today. That is, there is a measure of perception that there is an effort on to retard the impulse of organized labor in Barbados. Some people believe that. Never said that the honourable member. Mr. Speaker, I will leave them because I think reason has departed those minds. Oh yeah, I'm carrying somebody else's agenda. It used to be going after us. I wonder whose is it now. I wonder whose it is now. You used to say it was Oinafa's agenda. I wonder whose it is now. You see, you people over there, let me go there. Because some members in here may not be able to think for themselves. Some members in here may not be able to think for themselves and reason, but I can. And some members in here may not be able to say what they would wish they could say because of their current circumstance, but I can. So the feeling was back then, workers should not be used as pawns to achieve the government's ends. Now it is bad enough to use people as pawns. It is even worse and more tragic when in an effort to do so, you seek to fool them. There was an honorable member There was an honorable member, Mr. Speaker, by the name of Louis Tull. He spoke too. He said salary cuts by any name violate the law. Salary incisions, salary wounds, salary adjustments, which have the potential to create some disadvantage for the public servant, violate the law. It should be said, the interest rates that you get on these bonds is 5%. You don't get anywhere near that in the bank. It should be said, and it has been said. But it should also be said, the truth is, this is a loan, which when we have to pay it back, we have to charge you. You can't tell me how to speak. Cannot tell me how to speak. Of course, Mr. Speaker, you can always change the law to achieve your aims. You can always change the law to achieve your aims once you have the numbers. And they have the numbers. But challenges to the viability of unionization should be addressed. And there are challenges to the viability of unionization in Barbados, Mr. Speaker. And if this government's eyes are open, they will recognize that there are challenges to organized labor. What the government needs to do is two things. Make sure that the challenge to organized labor does not come from any of their efforts. And secondly, that private capital, which always seeks its own interests with the big aim of profit, will do what it can to marginalize labor. And therefore, the unionization process becomes a part of the target. Mr. Tull also raised the precept of the principle of protection against the Crown. Mr. Speaker, all I'm saying is that there are some dynamics that must come into this discussion, some considerations that must come into discussion, which were very prominent in a similar discussion almost 30 years ago. Mr. Speaker, the press has almost with repeated insistence, some members of the press, invited me to comment on the notion that there's a labor leadership sellout in Barbados. I have not commented on that out there. No one has ever heard me state that position. I am not saying it here on my feet in this moment. These people went to the best schools in Barbados. The press has often invited me to speak with reference to that matter. I have not expressed any opinion to that effect outside of...
Please allow the honorable member
outside
to
of
speak,
here
please.
or in here. Because I know that often from the distance, we judge people's actions by what we think we know, and often we are wrong. I have not expressed a view on that in public, neither in here nor outside. I have resisted supporting that view in any public comment of mine. I will simply suggest that the frustration of labor's struggles revolves around two things, Mr. Speaker. Historically in the Caribbean and elsewhere, frustrating of labor's struggles revolves around two things. One, the neutering of organized labor, by the targeted use of capital's finances in the direction that it politically favors. In other words, private interests support their political interests to try to suppress things like unionization. That is a theory. Historically, that has been the practice. It's investment power, that is the investment power of capital, over administrations in weak economies. That is a second consideration. So private capital favors certain political interests, it supports those interests, and therefore those interests can play back to the interests of that private capital in neutering unionization. They also wield an enormous amount of investment power in weak economies. This government has to be careful that those who come with a powerful investment dollars, whether they're from inside or outside, does not so wield that power that it becomes an agent in the process of neutering the process of organized labor in Barbados. I'm going to soon stop, Mr. Speaker, because I don't think those on the other side can take any more. I really don't think so. You know the strange thing about all of this? They've been listening to me, you know. They don't listen to their own speakers, but they've been listening to me. But that's an irony for you. He's talking so much nonsense, but yet they listen to me. They don't listen to their own enlightened speakers. When I take my seat, observe for yourself, Mr. Speaker. They will not give a generous ear to those who speak for them. Yeah, but of course I'm delusional. I want, before I sit down, to repeat my calls for better wage situations for the police of Barbados, for the nurses of Barbados, for the teachers of Barbados. Let me say my wife is a school teacher. It has nothing to do with that. I used to do some teaching and some lecturing and tutoring. It has nothing to do with that. It is my humble view that these three categories of workers do a tremendous job. Not that others don't, but these people do. And especially in this COVID period, and we talk about frontline people putting their lives at risk and all of that, and we come out on a Wednesday afternoon and applaud. That's good, I'm not decrying that, show appreciation. But I repeat what I said before, in a very tangible way, this country must find opportunity to show appreciation to those who were on the front lines when it mattered, in a tangible way. And if we can't do it in a monetary, financial fashion, let's do it in terms of the time that we can give them a break off from work, but something tangible. But in a general sense, Mr. Speaker, we have to lift the remuneration levels of those who are involved in the teaching service, those who are nurses in the health sector, and those who are in police service and on the front lines and doing a dangerous job. I want to repeat that. I will keep repeating it until... I think we need a better deal for women in the workplace, Mr. Speaker. We need a better deal for women in the workplace, Mr. Speaker. We have today, Her Excellency, a female. The Honorable Prime Minister, a female. I think the DPP is female. Leader of government business, a female, a charming one at that. And I mean that. I don't say things I don't mean. And women have been elevated to some positions of tremendous significance across the landscape of this land. And as we ponder that, reflect that, and celebrate that, because it's a thing to be celebrated, we need to remember the multiple numbers of women across this land who face various types of exploitation every day. And you see this COVID situation? I was saying to a colleague of mine, this COVID situation will greatly increase that tendency on the part of some out there to exploit women in this country. We need a better deal for women in Barbados. The time will come when hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that. Let me close with this one, because I can't quote everybody else. I can't quote everybody else in the world and not quote the Honorable Prime Minister, you know. After all, sir, this is the debate about the constitutional amendment, reference to salary. Sir, this is Hazard. Sir, I have no difficulty whatsoever in supporting this amendment to the Constitution because it seeks philosophically to correct a principle which, in my view, is flawed in its very nature, that the public servants of this country who constitute but only 25% of the labor force, that the public servants of this country who are only about 10% of the population should be the ones to bear the brunt of an adjustment in times of economic hardship. And that is our difficulty with the instance of 1991 when the Public Servants Reduction of Emoluments Act was passed. Now you keep saying, but this is not a cut. That is your argument. My argument is that this is a cut by another name. And we ain't going back there today. Still a cut. So you argue what you want, but I have to make public servants understand that this investment of which you speak is subject to certain jeopardy and risk going down the road, and they must be made aware. To pay, government must tax the public purse to pay. It will be paid in a time probably of increasing inflation. I repeat it because you haven't heard it yet. The value of money changes over time. Not making any arguments for the bank. The Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister then, she was not. It is not 10% of the population who owes 90% of the wealth in the country, but it was public servants numbering some 25,000, struggling to steer on a tightrope to keep ends together, struggling to stay on a tightrope to pay their mortgage, to be able to service other debts, to be able to keep their families together through the provision of food and other necessary items, to have a basic, decent existence that all parties in independence have promised them. That is the Prime Minister. She understood at the time that you have to be treading carefully when you're dealing with public servants' pay. Let me read this and close. I just wanted to finish, sir, by restating the fundamental philosophical position that divides this Barbados Labour Party from the Democratic Labour Party government, and that is that under no circumstances do we believe as a political party and as a government that a government must use the right to cut its civil servants' salary as a method of economic management in this country. And I can go on, but I can stop there. Now the argument I am putting hinges upon how you define this boss scheme. They define it as an investment. That's how they define it. I say if you consider all things about this thing, this is a wage adjustment that amounts to a cut for public servants. Because the value of your every dollar earned in your salary today, in given circumstances down the road, may very well not be the same. I thank you.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this is an appropriate time for us to cut. And perhaps adjourn, suspend Mr. Speaker until 2:45 p.m. this afternoon.
Yeah. The question is that this honorable chamber stands suspended until 2:45 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Until the ayes have it, this honorable chamber stands suspended until 2:45 p.m.